Madeline was just a simple employee, but her secret fortune shocked everyone. The arrogant CEO Blake judged her by her humble appearance, not imagining that she was a virgin and awakened an uncontrollable fascination in him. When Madeline appeared pregnant with twins, Blake wanted to marry immediately, but his pride and suspicions brought countless twists. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Madeline's heart was pounding by the time she stepped off the bus, smartphone in hand, scanning a headline that made her stomach twist. Her family's corporation, the same one she'd run from to forge her own path, had just closed a massive deal. She knew the ramifications of that announcement. If her family's new contract was half as large as the media claimed, it could shake the foundation of Blake C. Bradford's empire, her current boss and a man who prided himself on never being caught off guard. She hastily scrolled through the article, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Was her father involved in something bigger than anyone had anticipated? And more terrifying, would anyone discover she was actually heir to that rival empire? She shoved the phone into her bag and gathered her nerves. Rushing through the revolving doors of the skyscraper, she tried to blend in with the throngs of employees on their way to start another day. Her pulse refused to settle. Today was different. She felt it in the crisp, charged air of the lobby, where anxious faces strode past a towering glass wall and security turnstiles. The usual morning chatter was subdued, replaced by whispers of new threats, new deals, and new tensions. Everyone sensed an approaching storm in the business world. They just didn't know that Madeline was standing at the center of it. As she hurried to the elevator, she collided lightly with Celine, a friendly face in an environment that could be cuttingly competitive. Celine steadied her, raising an eyebrow in concern. "You okay? You're looking a little pale," she murmured, offering a small but supportive smile. Madeline forced a confident nod. "Just a hectic morning," she replied, leaving out the part about the news on her phone that might change her life in more ways than she could admit. "Thanks for asking." Celine gave a sympathetic shrug. "Don't sweat it. Just breathe. It's a big day, right? Board meeting, new proposals. You'll do great." Her words were gentle, but Madeline felt the weight of them. Today was indeed huge, far more than Celine could guess. If things went sideways, Madeline's carefully protected identity would lie in pieces. They parted ways in the corridor outside the boardroom. Madeline took a deep breath and tried to calm the flutter in her chest. She could do this. She had to. Inside, the meeting was already underway. Men and women in sharp suits sat around a long, polished table, reviewing the day's agenda on tablets. Blake stood at the head of the table, a commanding figure with an unyielding presence. The tension in his jaw told Madeline that he wasn't in a patient mood. She slid into a chair, hoping no one would notice her lateness. Blake's eyes flicked up and met hers in a cool, assessing stare. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features. She sank a bit in her seat, wishing she had arrived 5 minutes earlier. Someone was delivering a report about the latest developments in corporate technology, but the room was crackling with nervous energy. Speculation was swirling about an impending market shift, and many suspected that it stemmed from her family's firm, though no one here knew it was her family. She swallowed hard, pushing that thought away. This was not the time to lose composure. When an opening presented itself, she cleared her throat and, despite her anxiety, launched into a prepared suggestion she'd spent the weekend refining. Her idea was bold: a potential tech partnership with a smaller startup that specialized in data analytics. She believed it could give Blake's company a fresh edge. Her voice trembled slightly as she began, but she forced herself to press on. Implementing these advanced analytics could revolutionize the way we track and respond to market trends. If we act first, we'd position ourselves as a leader in the sector. Blake's brusque tone sliced through the air. "That's enough, Madeline." He didn't raise his voice, yet his words echoed. In an instant, the room went silent. Heads turned, and a hush fell over the table. While your enthusiasm is noted, perhaps we should stick to reality. We don't have time to invest in untested theories or budding startups right now. She flinched at his dismissal. Untested theories? Her mouth tightened. She'd run numbers for days, done thorough research, and she'd hoped for at least a genuine discussion. But he'd shot her down with a single sentence. If only he knew what she really had to bring to the table. The knowledge she'd gained from growing up in her father's shadow was invaluable. She'd witnessed how successful expansions were cultivated from new technology again and again. A few of the directors exchanged uncertain glances, clearly sensing the tension. At the far end of the table, one of them cleared his throat. Just a quick note, everyone. We've heard rumors that the rival firm might have just secured a massive deal. It's all over the news. If that rumor's true, we'll need to brace for any market turbulence. They might even try to buy out smaller players before we do. A hush stilled the conversation. Madeline tensed, feeling like every syllable was a direct threat to her secret. If the group discovered that the rival firm was run by her father, how would they react? She pressed her fingernails into her palm under the table, holding on to her composure. Blake straightened, looking even more resolute. His dark gaze swept the faces around him. We'll investigate the validity of that information and respond appropriately. No need for panic. His firm voice tried to squash any visible dread, but the undercurrent in the room was unmistakable. The rival firm was no trivial threat, and he knew it. Madeline's stomach churned with guilt. She lowered her gaze, dreading what might happen if they pieced together her real identity. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head, urging her to keep a low profile until he decided the time was right to reveal her. That had always been the agreement. Now, with each passing day, the balance felt more precarious. When the meeting concluded, people filtered out with murmurs about how to proceed. Madeline stayed behind, feeling a bit deflated. She gathered her notes, wishing she'd had the courage to push back harder. She felt a light tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found Celine standing there, a gentle smile on her face. "Your pitch was good. Don't let his reaction get to you," Celine whispered. "He's just stressed." They both glanced at Blake, who was deep in conversation with two directors and flicking an occasional glance their way. "You have great ideas. Keep pushing." Madeline's eyes stung with grateful tears she refused to let fall. "Thanks," she said softly, trying to smile. Then, almost as soon as Celine left, her phone started buzzing. She glanced at the screen and recognized her uncle's name. He was the only relative she trusted with her secret, that she worked for the competition and intended to prove her own worth on her own terms. She stepped into the hallway to take the call. His voice came through low and urgent. "Are you okay?" "Fine," she answered, still on edge. "Is something wrong at home?" A brief pause. "Your father finalized the deal. It's bigger than we expected. He's concerned that you might be in a tough spot. He's also pushing for you to come back, sooner rather than later." She cast a quick look around the corridor to ensure no one was listening. "I'll handle it," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just need more time." As she hung up, she nearly bumped into Blake. His imposing figure blocked her path, and his expression was unreadable. "Is everything all right?" he asked, a note of curiosity in his voice. Something about his gaze left her breathless. Did he suspect something? "It's nothing," she replied, guarding her tone. "A family matter. I'll be fine." He narrowed his eyes but let the topic drop. "I'd like you to compile the latest analytics in a concise report," he said. "Hand it to me by tomorrow morning." Madeline nodded, clenching her phone in one hand. "Understood." She felt a strange mix of disappointment and relief as he walked away. She couldn't blame him for being cautious. After all, he was under enormous pressure from shareholders and directors. And if she were to reveal that the threat was, in fact, her own family's business, she couldn't imagine how that would go. A few co-workers shot her judgmental looks in passing. After all, she'd tried, and failed, to push an ambitious idea. Perhaps they thought she was overstepping for someone at her junior level. She raised her chin, refusing to appear intimidated. She'd worked late nights to refine that pitch, and she still believed in it. One day, she intended to show them all what she could do. Later that night, alone in a quiet corner of the nearly empty office, she typed feverishly at her computer. The overhead lights hummed. She poured her energy into drafting a better, more detailed blueprint for her data analytics proposal. Even if Blake brushed her off again, she wouldn't stop trying to help this company stay competitive. She was wrestling with loyalty to her father's firm, but she also wanted to succeed in her new life. The conflict kept her mind spinning. A faint thunderclap drew her attention to the large windows. Dark clouds loomed over the city skyline, the streets below gleaming with rainfall. The hush of the office contrasted with the swirling anxiety in her thoughts. Rumors about a new heiress poised to shake up the market had circulated through private corporate circles. She couldn't hide from them forever. She was that heiress, whether she liked it or not. When she finally packed up to leave, the storm outside had grown fiercer. Wind rattled the glass doors as she stepped into the lobby. Her reflection looked back at her from the polished tiles, a somewhat tired young woman with too many secrets. She exhaled slowly, reminding herself that she'd made this choice. She needed to see it through. At the exit, she fished her keys out of her coat pocket, thinking of little else but her warm bed at home, until her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and recognized a familiar number. Her father. The text was brief but heavy with implication. "We need you sooner than you think. Come home." The words sent a tremor through her. Her double life was teetering on the brink, and she couldn't escape the feeling that every move she made now would either salvage or destroy everything she'd worked so hard for. If she didn't return home, her father might expose her anyway, unveiling the truth that could shatter her standing here. But if she did, she'd be walking straight into a confrontation that might tear her loyalties apart. She stood still, the storm raging outside, her phone screen illuminating the dread on her face. There it was, a single text from her father, and suddenly the entire world felt as though it was about to shift. Standing by the office exit, Madeline receives a cryptic text from her father. "We need you sooner than you think. Come home." She's left trembling at the possibility that her double life is on the verge of being exposed. Madeline had barely slept when morning arrived. The light filtering through her curtains revealed puffy eyes and a face etched with worry. She sat up, recalling the text she'd received the night before, her father's urgent request to come home. That single line had echoed in her thoughts until dawn, rattling her resolve to maintain her carefully guarded secret. Now, as she read it again, the message felt even heavier. She drew in a slow breath, thinking of all the possible ways her world could unravel if she returned prematurely. But ignoring his summons could be just as dangerous. She swallowed the doubt and decided to wait before replying. There was too much at stake for a hasty decision. At the office, people hurried about with unusual excitement, talking about the upcoming convention at a luxurious resort. For many, it was a chance to network and score deals that might propel their careers forward. For Madeline, it was a chance to finally prove her worth to Blake, to show she wasn't merely the timid junior employee he seemed to think she was. But the tension from the previous day's board meeting still hung in the air, and she wasn't sure if Blake would give her that opportunity. Celine caught up with her at the elevator. "Are you all packed for the trip?" she asked, her warm eyes reflecting genuine concern. "You look a little on edge." Madeline forced a small smile. "I'm all right, just didn't get much sleep." She stepped into the elevator, and Celine followed, but the doors almost closed on someone else's arm, Blake, striding in at the last second. His expression was stern as he took his place at the front, silent and distant. The ride up to the executive floor felt like it stretched on forever, none of them speaking. Madeline's heart thudded, remembering how he'd shut down her idea in the boardroom. She wondered if he still thought of her as little more than an overzealous newcomer. When the doors finally slid open, Blake fixed his gaze on her. "You're attending the convention," he said, as if it were a directive, not a question. "We'll need everyone prepared. If you have any plans to make yourself useful, do it there." His voice carried a note of challenge, like he was daring her to prove herself. Then he stepped out, leaving her in awkward silence. Celine nudged her gently once they reached their desks. "Hey, look on the bright side. It sounds like he expects you to step up," she said, trying to be encouraging. "This is your chance, and the resort is supposed to be incredible, so that's a bonus." Madeline nodded, torn between gratitude for the opportunity and dread over the precarious tightrope she was walking. She spent most of the morning gathering files, double-checking her prototypes and documents, hoping to seize the moment if an investor asked the right question. Celine helped assemble the final details, occasionally cracking jokes about them escaping the city for a few days of work in a lavish hotel. Madeline appreciated the levity more than she could say. Later that day, a company shuttle whisked her and the rest of the team toward the resort. The bus ride buzzed with chatter about potential business deals and the beautiful seaside location. She tried to relax, gazing out at the passing scenery, but her mind kept drifting to her father's cryptic text. No matter how much she tried to ignore it, it hovered like a thundercloud on the horizon. When they arrived, the resort's marble-floored lobby took her breath away. Ornate chandeliers glittered overhead, reflecting on polished floors where neatly dressed guests milled about. She hadn't felt truly awestruck by such opulence in a long time. Despite her hidden inheritance, she'd made a point of living modestly these past years, not wanting special treatment or to draw attention. Yet, as she observed the gleaming statues and tall glass walls, she recalled her childhood memories of similarly grand spaces, times she'd walked beside her father in boardrooms just as luxurious, if not more so. She helped the group check in, grateful for the small distractions of distributing keys and printing out name badges. Within the hour, an evening reception brought together executives and investors from various industries, everyone dressed to impress, and Blake, looking impeccable in a tailored suit, escorted a small cluster of high-profile partners around the room. Madeline found herself introduced to several of them, though Blake's manner remained distant, almost curt, as if she were merely an afterthought. Despite the sting, she managed polite smiles and tried to join conversations, certain someone would ask about her thoughts on the latest market trends. Her confidence wavered, however, when she spotted a few familiar faces from her family's company drifting across the room. She tensed, turning away before they noticed her. The jolt of panic sent her pulse racing. If anyone recognized her here, it could blow her entire cover. She hid behind a tall arrangement of white lilies for a moment, pretending to admire their fragrance, praying no one remembered her face from past events. After all, she'd been absent from her father's world long enough that some mid-level reps might not remember her clearly. But what if they did? Trying to steady her nerves, she accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and kept close to Celine, who was doing her best to break the ice with several visiting guests. It helped, just having someone friendly by her side. Yet the sense of looming danger refused to vanish. Before the evening wrapped up, Blake maneuvered through the crowd toward her. She realized there was an edge to his eyes she couldn't decipher. "Heard a whisper," he said quietly, stepping aside with her to a corner of the hall, "that someone on my team might be letting things slip, information about potential partnerships, mergers, strategies. I don't tolerate leaks." His words stabbed at her. She tried not to look guilty, even though she knew she had bigger secrets than a simple leak. "I'm sure it's just rumors," she replied, hoping her voice sounded steady. "I'd never—" He took a moment to study her. "You never know who's listening," he said, crossing his arms. "Be careful, and stay out of any conversation that isn't your concern." She bristled. "I understand," she managed, though his warning felt needlessly harsh. A small flicker of something else flicked across his features. Was it worry? Or was it curiosity? She couldn't tell. For a second they locked eyes, and an electric awareness passed between them. But then he turned, leaving her standing there with her heart pounding faster than she cared to admit. Celine caught her arm as he walked away. "What happened?" she whispered, noticing the color in Madeline's cheeks. Madeline exhaled slowly. I think he suspects someone's betraying the company. I'm not sure if he thinks it's me, but he's definitely on edge." She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out strained. "It's intense, that's for sure." "Don't let him intimidate you," Celine advised, giving her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "But seriously, if he said something awful, tell me. We can both avoid him together." Madeline mustered a grateful smile, though she couldn't push away the unease gnawing at her insides. That evening, the entire group attended a formal dinner in one of the resort's elegant dining rooms. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking view of the ocean under a sunset sky streaked in orange and lavender. Tall candles flickered on the table, casting soft light on the polished silverware. Madeline found herself seated next to Blake. The silence between them felt charged, full of unsaid words and unspoken accusations. She picked at her meal, trying to focus on conversation with others, but the awareness of Blake's presence lingered at her side. Every so often their eyes would meet, and her pulse would skip. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, her phone vibrated in her pocket. Curious, she pulled it out under the tablecloth. Her father. "Stay alert. The deal is bigger than you know," the text read. Her stomach tightened. Had he sent people to the same convention, or was there a more immediate threat? When she managed to slip away from the group afterward, she found herself wandering through the hotel corridors, searching for a moment of calm. She ended up on a balcony overlooking the moonlit beach, inhaling the salty breeze that came off the waves. The moon cast silvery ripples on the water, and for a moment she closed her eyes, wondering if there was a path to protect her father's interests without betraying the trust she was slowly building here. She feared it might be impossible to satisfy both sides. Opening her eyes, she gazed down at the shoreline. The gentle ebb and flow of the tide calmed her racing thoughts, if only briefly. She leaned on the railing, hugging her arms to her chest, unsure if she'd be forced to pick a side in this brewing corporate storm. The threads of her two worlds were tangling fast, tightening around her like a net. Footsteps behind her broke the spell. She glanced over her shoulder and saw Blake there, silhouetted by the soft light from the corridor. He didn't step onto the balcony, but he didn't leave either. She felt the weight of his gaze, and she couldn't help but wonder what he saw when he looked at her. A potential ally or someone about to wreak havoc on his life's work. She turned her face back to the moonlit ocean, not entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Right as Madeline turns to go back inside, her phone rings. Seeing it's from her father, she freezes, unaware that Blake watches from the shadows. Will she answer and risk being overheard? Madeline held her breath on the hotel balcony, her phone glowing in her hand, her father's name announcing itself in neat black letters. It took her a moment to silence the ring without actually answering. Then, trying to pretend nothing was amiss, she slipped the phone into her pocket. When she turned around, she discovered Blake had quietly stepped away. Perhaps he'd decided not to pry, or perhaps he already suspected something. Her pulse pounded with uncertainty. The next day began under a clear blue sky, the sun bright over the palm-studded grounds of the luxurious resort. White conference tents and shining technology displays were set up near the convention center, and attendees were milling about in crisp business attire, energized by the possibility of striking deals. Madeline did her best to appear calm, all while replaying that missed call from her father in her mind. She tried to convince herself that ignoring him was a wise move. If she picked up, he might have demanded she return home. She had no intention of leaving, at least not until she'd proven what she was capable of here. Inside the conference hall, the morning air hummed with eager voices. Blake's company had arranged a cutting-edge demonstration of next-generation analytics, and Madeline was tasked with helping set up the display. People crowded around, curious about the latest corporate software, a platform designed to streamline data from multiple markets at once. Though she was still rattled from the tension between her loyalty to her father and her growing dedication to Blake's firm, she welcomed the chance to focus on something concrete. As the session got underway, Madeline presented a portion of the pitch to a cluster of investors who had gathered around. She explained how this advanced tool could predict and adapt to real-time consumer trends. Her voice was clear, her words backed by nights of research. Some of the investors seemed impressed, scribbling notes or nodding thoughtfully. She spotted Blake circling the group, observing from the sidelines with his arms crossed. He wore his usual steeled expression, but his eyes rarely left her. She refused to let that distraction interfere with her talk, determined to earn a positive response. Once she'd finished the pitch, applause erupted. Light, but genuine. A confident flush warmed her cheeks. She felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, Blake would see she wasn't the naive junior he took her for. But as she stepped away from the demonstration area, she heard the low murmurs spreading around the convention floor. Rumors about the rival Heiress were in the air, drifting from cluster to cluster of attendees. Some said she was poised to appear, that she was the key to a major new deal. Madeline's nerves jumped. Could someone have recognized her? It seemed unlikely. She was just a small figure in a bustling room, but the worry gnawed at her all the same. Before she could chase that thought further, Blake approached from behind, his voice low. "Good job out there," he acknowledged, though he looked tense. "We should talk, away from the crowd." She followed him to a quieter backstage area. The heavy curtains muffled the roar of networking outside, creating an oddly intimate pocket of space filled with crates of equipment and leftover promotional banners. Blake turned to face her, his posture rigid. "I heard more rumors about a potential leak. People are convinced someone's feeding intel to my competitors." His eyes narrowed. And now, with news of this so-called mysterious heir floating around, the company's on edge. She hesitated, fighting the urge to glance away. "You still think I'm the leak?" "I'm considering all possibilities," he replied, leaving no room for argument. "You've been very eager lately, and you have an unusual determination to push those analytics. Care to explain?" Her stomach twisted. She wanted to shout that it was because she believed in the technology, not because she was sneaking information back home to her father. But if she sounded too defensive, he'd doubt her even more. "I'm just trying to help," she said, keeping her voice level. "If you trust me, you'll see that I'm doing my best for this company." He folded his arms. "Trust is earned." The word stung, and for a moment she worried her face might betray her fear. "Just keep in mind," he added, "if you're lying to me or hiding something, it's going to come out." His stern tone triggered a prickle of alarm. She swallowed hard. "I understand." Outside, the conference continued. With barely enough time to catch her breath, Madeline threw herself back into investor conversations. She felt an odd surge of determination. If she performed well, maybe Blake would back off. A wave of self-assurance carried her through to a private meeting with a mid-level investor who'd heard her presentation that morning and wanted more details. Stepping into a small lounge area, Madeline greeted him with a polite handshake. The investor introduced himself as Samuel Long, a focused man with keen eyes. Together, they dove into the specifics of what her analytics could offer. She highlighted real success stories and cost projections with careful precision. By the end of their discussion, Long looked convinced, enough that he proposed a modest but significant contract, enough to lock in a pilot test for the new software. Heart-hammering, Madeline glanced at the dotted line of the preliminary agreement. Signing him now would give Blake's company a foothold in the market, a stepping stone to bigger deals. With a flourish of a pen, Long committed to the pilot. Madeline could hardly contain her excitement. She gave him a professional smile, thanked him for his time, and promised to follow up with any further details he needed. The moment she was out of the lounge, she texted Celine the news, her fingers trembling in exhilaration. It might not be the biggest contract in the world, but it proved her ideas had value. She made her way through the crowd, spotting Blake in conversation with a group of executives. Catching her eye, he excused himself and came over. "Well?" he asked, raising a brow. She held up the document. "We just landed a pilot program with Long & Associates. Not huge, but it's a start." Blake scanned the contract details. Then, to her astonishment, he gave a small nod of approval. "Not bad," he said, pocketing the paperwork. For a split second, she almost saw a faint grin tug at the corner of his mouth, but it vanished. "Good work. We can leverage this to get bigger deals if we handle it right." With that, he turned to go back to his group. But this time, he didn't leave her with a cold remark. She interpreted that as progress, however slight. Her happiness dimmed when she spotted a face across the crowd she recognized, an executive from her father's corporation. He stood by a display of sleek virtual products, scanning the crowd with alert eyes. The sight of him made her heart jump. She quickly stepped behind a tall banner, not wanting him to see her. A jolt of panic nearly made her drop her phone. Had he noticed her? She couldn't be sure. She hurried off to find Celine, needing a friendly presence amid the swirling tension. But before she could, her phone chimed in her pocket. She glanced down to see another message from her father. "Your place is by our side. Time is running out." Her heart drummed against her ribs. She forced herself to breathe, to think rationally. Still rattled, she managed to finish the day's sessions without further encounters. As twilight fell, many attendees drifted to an open-air bar near the resort pool for casual networking. Fairy lights glimmered overhead, and a soft hum of conversation filled the tropical evening air. Madeline stayed back, preferring a quieter corner to collect her thoughts. The success of landing the contract was overshadowed by the knowledge that her father's people were here, and her father's relentless messages were piling up. Eventually, she tried to settle her nerves with a short walk around the resort's gardens. The pathway was lined with lanterns, the warm glow reflecting on ponds of koi fish. She was nearly lulled by the tranquil setting when a clipped voice startled her. "I thought I might find you out here," came Blake's tone from a few paces behind. She turned to see him walking toward her, jacket slung over his arm. His expression was guarded, though not as severe as usual. "Congratulations on today," he said, stopping under the soft glow of a nearby lantern. "That contract's a good start." A part of her wanted to thank him for acknowledging her effort, but another part remembered how he'd confronted her backstage. "I'm just doing what I can," she managed evenly. They stood there, facing each other, the distant sound of crickets and murmuring water creating an intimate cocoon around them. He shifted, as if uncertain what to say next. "It can't be easy," he said finally, "trying to prove yourself in front of everyone, especially if they question your intentions." She blinked, surprised at the hint of understanding in his tone. "I guess not," she replied. "But I don't want a free pass. I want to show I'm good enough." He studied her in the soft light. Something about his gaze made her heart thump in her chest. She almost thought he might admit he saw more in her than just a junior employee. The tension between them felt charged, but then footsteps nearby broke the moment. A group of fellow attendees passed by, exchanging polite greetings. By the time they were gone, Blake had stepped back, as though he'd remembered who they were supposed to be, boss and employee. Before either could speak again, a staff member from the event hurried over. "They're about to announce a big door prize in the main hall," he said breathlessly. "They want all attendees present." Blake turned to Madeline with an unreadable expression. "We should go." She nodded, falling into step beside him. Inside, applause and bright lights filled the atrium. People stood in clusters, chatting excitedly. But Madeline's mind was far from any raffle or door prize. She could barely keep her thoughts off the possibility that her father's colleague might have seen her face. If so, it was only a matter of time before word reached home that she was here, actively working for the competition. Toward the end of the evening, she finally found a few minutes to breathe. Feeling drained, she slipped outside again and lingered under the resort's canopied entrance, searching the sky for stars. The tropical night air clung to her skin. A noise from behind made her glance over her shoulder. It was Celine, wearing a broad grin. "Guess who just heard?" she said, practically bouncing. "You, Madeline, closed a contract that a couple of senior execs have been chasing for months." Madeline's eyes widened. "Really? I didn't realize it was that sought after." Celine laughed. "Yep, I overheard some of them talking about how you beat them to the punch. Don't worry, they aren't angry, just impressed." A nervous giggle escaped Madeline's throat. "Well, that's good news, I guess." "You bet it is!" Celine looped an arm around Madeline's shoulders. "Celebrate this win. You deserve it." They chatted for a few minutes before Celine said goodnight and headed to her own room. Left alone, Madeline inhaled deeply, a mix of triumph and dread swirling in her chest. On one hand, she'd just advanced her standing in Blake's eyes, maybe even earned a sliver of his trust. On the other, she was increasingly aware that the clock was ticking on her father's ultimatum. A short while later, she climbed the stairs to her hotel room, exhaustion pressing down on her. Yet, she couldn't relax. The tension she'd shared with Blake backstage rattled in her mind. The fleeting moment of warmth in the garden lingered too, stirring confusing emotions. But none of it mattered if the secret she was hiding came crashing out into the open. Late at night, she settled into bed, phone resting on the nightstand. She closed her eyes, hoping for a few hours of dreamless sleep. But when the phone buzzed softly, she jolted upright. A new voice note from her father. Carefully, she lifted it to her ear and pressed play. His frail tone reached her. "Your place is by our side. Time is running out." He sounded worn, older and more desperate than ever before. She let the phone drop to the covers, her stomach twisting. Hiding this forever was impossible. Sooner or later, Blake would learn the truth, that she was the so-called mysterious heir to the rival firm knocking on his door. Late at night, as Madeline steps away from the crowd, she receives a voice note from her father. "Your place is by our side. Time is running out." She realizes she can't hide forever. Madeline awoke to find herself still in the hotel room, the faint morning light creeping through heavy drapes. She sat up slowly, the events of the previous night cascading through her mind. Her father's voice note, his plea for her to come home, echoed endlessly. Each time she thought of ignoring it, guilt weighed down on her. If she intended to protect both her own path and the people she was growing to care about in Blake's company, she had to face her family head-on. By lunchtime, attendees at the resort were scattering. Some stayed on for additional meetings, but Madeline felt the unmistakable pull of responsibility. She couldn't concentrate on half-hearted conversations or the lingering glances from colleagues who sensed her distraction. Heart racing, she gathered her laptop, thanked Celine for her support, and assured her she'd be back soon. Then she went to check out of the hotel. Just as she was wheeling her suitcase across the marble lobby, she spotted Blake approaching, hands in his pockets, his expression guarded. "You're leaving early," he observed. It wasn't really a question. "Everything all right?" She swallowed. It's personal. Something came up." She almost wished he would pry, despite the risk. Part of her was desperate for someone to lean on, even if that someone was the stern CEO who seemed both infuriating and intriguing. His brow creased. "If you need time off, you can officially request it," he said. "But don't vanish without a trace." A flicker of gratitude sparked in her chest. His words were laced with caution, yet they hinted at a concern she couldn't ignore. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I'll send a request through HR. I promise I'll be reachable." Before he could say more, she turned away, heading out into the sunshine with her luggage. She felt his gaze trailing her until she stepped through the revolving doors. Her thoughts whirled as she made the long drive to her childhood home, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. The grounds seemed both familiar and remote, memories flooding back of her father's once booming voice echoing in polished hallways, the well-kept gardens where she'd spent lonely afternoons. Guilt gnawed at her again. She'd left that life behind, determined to earn her place in the world on her own terms. Yet, the family name still clung to her like a shadow she couldn't fully escape. She pulled up to the iron gates, noting how they creaked slightly, a sign that time had passed since someone last oiled them. Driving through the stately trees, she parked near the front entrance. The house loomed large and silent, with only a few staff members visible, scurrying about in hushed efficiency. Her father's illness had changed the atmosphere. It was no longer bustling with extended family gatherings and social events. Her uncle met her at the door, his smile tinged with relief. "Madeline," he said softly, pulling her into a brief hug. "I'm glad you came." "How is he?" she asked. Her uncle pressed his lips together. "He's weak, very determined, though. He wants to finalize a number of deals to ensure the company's future, and he wants to see you." She brushed past him, following the corridor to her father's study. Old portraits lined the walls, each face from her family's past seeming to watch her with silent judgment. She stepped inside and found her father seated behind a massive desk, hooked up to a portable oxygen unit. He looked pale, yet his eyes flashed with the same sharpness that once commanded boardrooms. "You came," he said. His voice was hoarse, but pride shimmered in his gaze. "I hoped you wouldn't ignore my messages." Madeline approached, her stomach in knots. "I couldn't ignore you. You sounded like you needed me." He offered a faint nod. "I do need you, more than ever. This last deal, my legacy, needs to be completed. Our business hinges on it, and I want you at the forefront." He paused, a raspy breath escaping. "I also know you've been away, hiding from your own name. That's not possible anymore. The press is sniffing around and our investors demand the next heir step up." Her mouth went dry. "But I'm not ready to step into that role," she said, trying to keep her tone steady. "And I have other obligations now." His lips tightened, and she could see how the weight of his illness made him impatient. "Obligations at Blake's company, you mean?" "Yes, I know." A note of disapproval crept into his voice. "Why waste your time there when you can do more for your real family here?" "It's not a waste," she insisted, frustration tingling at the back of her throat. She wanted to tell him how proud she was of negotiating deals on her own merit, how satisfying it felt to be recognized as capable, without any family name attached. But the same old arguments threatened to bubble up. Instead, she straightened. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "The right thing is to stand by your family. We're in the final stages of a major contract, and if we move fast, we could unify or overshadow the competition." His gaze sharpened. "Your competition, from what I hear. You could give us inside information, help ensure our success." She bristled, her voice unsteady. "I won't be your spy. I won't betray anyone. Not you and not them." A flicker of disappointment crossed his face. "So you choose them over me?" "I'm dying, Madeline. I may not have much time left. Everything we've built could collapse. Are you willing to let that happen because you want to prove you can stand on your own 2 feet?" She stilled, tears threatening. Guilt twisted inside her. She loved her father in spite of his flaws. Still, she wouldn't blindly sabotage people who had come to trust her, especially not Blake's employees who depended on the company for their livelihoods. "I'm not choosing anyone over you," she managed. "I'm trying to find a way forward that doesn't tear everything apart." He waved a hand as though brushing off her conflict. "There's no time for that. Business is war. You should know that by now." His breath was ragged. Just think about it. You don't have to give me your answer today." Blinking back tears, she excused herself. The sharp smell of antiseptic mixed with the old leather in the study left her feeling suffocated. Outside, she leaned against the banister of the sweeping staircase, collecting herself. Her uncle appeared, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He puts on a strong front," he said softly, "but we both know how serious his condition is. He wants to see the future of the company secured. He wants to see you in that future." "I understand," she whispered, "but I also can't just destroy another business. I can't sabotage the people who trust me." Her uncle nodded solemnly. "You have to find a balance," he said, "but don't let fear stop you from being honest, especially with the people who matter." She pressed her lips together. "I don't know how they'd react if they knew who I really am. And Dad wants me to hurry back, possibly to sign deals that could wipe out or force a merger with Blake's firm." "Tell him you need more time," her uncle advised, "and whatever happens, don't wait until it's too late." She stayed that night in her old bedroom, a place that felt frozen in time, with faded posters on the walls and a desk scattered with relics of teenage dreams. The next morning she rose early, determined not to linger. She found her father still asleep, and though he looked frail, he was at least resting peacefully. Slipping out quietly, she left a note on the bedside table. "I'll be back soon. I promise." On the drive back to the city, she couldn't shake the heaviness of her father's words. If she didn't act quickly, the chance to shape a peaceful alliance, or at least minimize damage, might disappear. Yet revealing her true lineage to Blake felt even more dangerous. She imagined his stunned expression, the fury in his eyes. Would he fire her on the spot? Accuse her of infiltrating his company under false pretenses? Or would he somehow understand? The possibilities made her stomach churn. Late that afternoon, she pulled into the parking structure of Blake's headquarters. She felt like a traitor to both sides, torn between her family's urgent pleas and her newfound ambition. As she made her way up the elevator, her reflection in the metal doors looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, tension etched along her brow. She braced herself for the questions that might come from co-workers about why she'd left the convention so abruptly. But the office was strangely quiet. A few people recognized her and waved politely, though she sensed an undercurrent of unease. She checked her messages and saw multiple notifications from Celine, who asked if everything was all right. Another from HR confirmed her short-term personal leave, and there was one from Blake. Just a simple note. "We need to talk when you're back." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the computer monitor fill the silence. Everything felt on a knife's edge. Her father's deal, his future, on one side, Blake's growing trust, and the job she cherished on the other. She typed out a quick reply to Blake, requesting a meeting the following morning. Then, drained and stressed, she decided to head home early. Strolling through the lobby, she paused near the glass doors, a sudden wave of uncertainty gripping her. She'd come back to the city to stand firm, but she still had no idea how to negotiate the path ahead. Was there a way to keep both worlds from colliding in ruin? Just then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw her father's assistant's number. Reluctantly, she answered. "Yes?" His voice was calm, but urgent. "He wants to announce you publicly as the new heir. Time is almost up." Madeline's breath caught in her throat. She squeezed the phone, staring at the city lights beyond the doors. If her father's plan went forward, the entire business world, Blake included, would know the truth about her. The walls she'd built around her secret would come crashing down. Just as she's leaving, her father's assistant texts, "He wants to announce you publicly as the new heir. Time is almost up." Madeline gasps, realizing the news could break at any moment, threatening everything she's built at Blake's company. Madeline stepped into the office early, determined to steady her shaking nerves before the day's storm. Ever since she'd received the message that her father planned to announce her publicly as the new heir, she'd slept little and thought of nothing else. How soon would that bomb drop? She hovered by a window in the empty hallway, watching the city stir to life. Buses rattled along their routes, and men in suits hurried to towering buildings, just like this one. A silent question kept circling in her mind. Could she still salvage this situation, or would her double life unravel beyond repair? She inhaled deeply and made her way toward the main conference room where the board of directors was scheduled to gather. On her path, she encountered Blake striding with purpose, each step resonating with silent power. He caught sight of her, and their gazes locked. His face was a mask of controlled frustration. "You disappeared from the resort," he said, voice low. "No explanation, no word on when you'd be back. Then you roll in here before dawn?" Madeline swallowed hard. "I had a personal emergency," she answered, keeping her tone firm. "I'm sorry for the abrupt departure." For a moment she thought he might press her for more details, but footsteps echoed in the corridor behind them. Several directors passed by with quick nods, eyes sliding between Blake and Madeline. Tension lit the air like static before a thunderstorm. "Let's pick this up after the meeting," Blake murmured, giving her a final searching look. She nodded, relief and anxiety clashing in her stomach. Then he brushed past, heading into the conference room. Madeline followed, feeling the weight of so many eyes. Inside, voices overlapped in heated discussion, and she realized they'd started early. Charts and graphs about the recent market threat littered the long table. The board members were clearly agitated. One of them, an older man with silver hair, pointed a pen at the projected slides. "We can't ignore the numbers. The rival corporation is riding a wave of success, and we're left watching our stock prices teeter. We need a decisive move now." Another director with a sharp business suit and a sharper voice cut in. "Our best option is to launch a takeover strategy. If we acquire or eliminate them before they merge with someone bigger, we'll snuff out the threat." Madeline's breath caught. Her family's company, her own blood, was the enemy these people wanted to crush. She clenched her hands under the table, trying to keep a neutral expression. She could sense Blake watching her closely from his seat at the head of the table. One director adjusted his glasses and glanced at Madeline. "You have some knowledge of new partnerships and tech expansions. Don't you think we should act first?" She felt her heartbeat pound at her temples. After everything she'd witnessed, she couldn't remain silent. "I think a destructive takeover would damage our reputation and might cost us far more than we realize," she began. "There could be an opportunity for negotiation or a joint venture. For all we know, forging an alliance might strengthen us both." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several board members looked incredulous, exchanging puzzled or irritated glances. One man gave a humorless chuckle. "That sounds dangerously naive. They'd bury us if they had the chance." Madeline's voice trembled with urgency. "We don't know that. A forced buyout can create more chaos, especially for employees. If we consider a collaborative approach, maybe we'd—" Blake slammed a hand lightly on the table, cutting off the argument. "All right, enough." His gaze swept the room, lingering on Madeline for a long second. "I hear your concerns, but we'll evaluate every angle before we make a reckless move." The silver-haired board member opened his mouth to protest, but Blake's firm stare silenced him. "We'll reconvene in 2 days for a final decision," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Meeting adjourned. With that, the tense gathering dispersed, a few directors shooting Madeline suspicious looks as they left. She felt her cheeks burn under their scrutiny, aware she'd practically argued against the entire room's appetite for aggression. On some level, she knew she'd painted a target on her back. As soon as the last board member filed out, Madeline rose from her chair, only to find Blake blocking her path to the door. His expression was a storm of conflicting emotions. He waited until the others had gone out of earshot. "You realize how your stance looked in there?" he asked, voice unusually hushed. "It's as if you're sympathizing with the other side." and not just sympathizing, defending them. Her throat went dry. I'm not defending anyone, I'm just thinking logically. A hostile takeover might harm us more than help. He exhaled sharply, then motioned for her to follow him into the hallway. They walked side by side, tension radiating between them like heat. Once they were past a cluster of employees, he turned on her. Everyone's already on edge, Madeline. You vanishing at the resort, reappearing out of nowhere, then taking a stance that benefits our competitors. It's suspicious. She squared her shoulders, though her pulse fluttered with panic. I'm not undermining this company. I'm trying to keep us from making a damaging mistake. Her voice wavered on the last word, betraying her nerves. I know the board thinks I'm just a junior employee overstepping boundaries, but I can't stay silent if I see a path that might save us money, time, and reputational risk. He narrowed his eyes, scanning her face like he was searching for any hint of dishonesty. Do you know something the rest of us don't? Madeline hesitated, nearly letting a piece of the truth slip. She considered telling him right then that she was the rival firm's heiress, caught between two warring sides, but fear choked the confession. I only know we shouldn't act rashly. A wave of frustration passed over his features, and he ran a hand through his hair. Fine, he muttered. We'll see how the board reacts to your idea, but be prepared, they may interpret your caution as disloyalty. Before she could respond, Celine appeared at the corner, eyes darting between them. She sensed the hostility in the air. Is everything okay? She asked carefully, placing a hand on Madeline's arm in a show of solidarity. Blake stiffened. We're done here, he said curtly, stepping away. He cast one last hard glance at Madeline. Don't keep anything from me, Madeline. If I find out there's more going on, it won't end well. Then he was gone, leaving Madeline staring at the empty space where he'd stood. She felt raw, as though she'd just narrowly escaped revealing her deepest secret. Celine guided her into a small, out-of-the-way conference room. You look like you're about to pass out, she said gently, urging Madeline to sit at the table. Madeline sank into the chair, pressing a hand to her forehead. I spoke up in there about not crushing the other company. The entire board turned on me. I almost lost my temper. She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. Blake suspects something. I can see it in his eyes. Celine exhaled, pulling up another chair to sit close. He's suspicious because you're advocating caution, right? It's not that crazy. But maybe from their perspective. I know. Madeline rubbed her temples. It looks bad, like I'm taking the rival's side. She let out a shaky breath. I'm just so torn, Celine. Her friend nodded, concern etched on her face. I can tell you're dealing with something huge. You don't have to tell me all the details, but please take care of yourself. Madeline managed a grateful smile, though it quickly faded. The board is holding an emergency session soon. They want to finalize a strategy. I'm afraid they'll push for an all-out takeover. She nearly voiced her real fear, that her father's final plans might become public knowledge even sooner, forcing her into a showdown she wasn't ready for. Celine gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. If anyone can find a middle ground, it's you. An uneasy silence settled. Finally, Madeline walked out of the small conference room, promising Celine she'd try to rest. But her mind still raced, shifting between her ailing father's demands and her commitment to preventing a corporate disaster. She made it to her desk, only to see a note pinned to her monitor. Another board meeting had been called for the next morning, earlier than expected. The sense of dread in her gut intensified. She retreated to a quiet corner to gather her thoughts. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her phone, half expecting another call from her father, or maybe a message that the media had discovered her identity. Instead, a different notification buzzed across the screen. The text read, "Urgent. Dad's health is in critical condition." She realized time was running out for both the family business and her personal truth. Madeline could hardly focus after reading the urgent text about her father's critical health. Her mind churned with images of hospital corridors, doctors speaking in hushed voices, and a bed occupied by the man who'd once seemed too strong to ever fall ill. She stood in the middle of her apartment's small living room, phone in hand, torn between an immediate flight back home and her obligations at Blake's company. This was exactly the nightmare she'd tried to avoid, balancing a family crisis with the life she'd built on her own terms. Before the sun rose the next morning, she tossed a few clothes into a bag, fully intending to resign from her job and return to her father's side. If he was truly in danger, staying away any longer felt heartless, yet a part of her kept hesitating. She couldn't forget the colleagues who counted on her projects, the investor who signed a pilot deal, and the precarious negotiations that might decide the future of the company. And then there was Blake. In spite of his suspicion and guarded demeanor, she sensed flashes of genuine concern beneath the surface. She left the suitcase half-zipped on her bed and arrived at the office unusually early, nerves on edge. An eerie hush filled the corridors before the bulk of employees arrived. Dim overhead lights buzzed quietly, and her footsteps echoed in the emptiness. Sitting at her desk, she composed a resignation letter. Multiple drafts, actually, each one typed and deleted. The words seemed straightforward enough, but the moment she typed her name at the bottom, her stomach lurched with doubt. Her phone chimed as she stared at the blinking cursor on her screen. She flipped it over to check. A message from Celine, short and kind. "Heard something serious happened. Let me know if I can help." Madeline felt a wave of gratitude. Celine didn't know all her secrets, but she'd always been supportive. For a second, Madeline considered confiding in her, yet it felt unfair to burden a friend who might end up entangled in chaos. She made up her mind to speak with Blake first. Whether it was to resign or to ask for extended leave, she didn't want him blindsided. Rising from her seat, she walked through the quiet halls toward his corner office. But just as she neared his door, she spotted a handful of senior managers huddled inside, speaking in tense voices. Blake stood at the center, arms crossed, his gaze flicking up as she approached. He waved her in. "What's going on?" she asked, eyeing the grim faces in the room. One manager cleared his throat. "We've just learned that a potential investor, someone quite significant, wants to finalize talks today. If we can secure their backing, it may tip the scales in our favor. We could use a sharper edge in these negotiations." Blake nodded. "They specifically asked for a demonstration of the data analytics platform you've been championing. They want a thorough breakdown. That means you." His voice sounded almost reluctant, yet there was a note of certainty. "I need your help putting the final documents together and presenting the pitch." Surprise washed over her. She'd assumed the board saw her as the company's liability, someone too sympathetic to the rival firm. The idea that Blake would request her assistance felt like a lifeline and a test all at once. She swallowed her own conflict, pushing aside her father's health for a moment. Maybe if she closed this deal, she'd leave on a note of strength instead of scandal. "All right," she said quietly. "Tell me what needs to be done." The managers dispersed, relief flickering across their faces. Blake lingered, studying her. He must have noticed her weary expression and the lines of tension around her eyes. "There's more on your mind than just work," he observed, voice low. Madeline considered deflecting, but the concern in his gaze was disarming. I've got a family emergency," she admitted. "I was thinking of resigning, or at least taking indefinite leave." His frown deepened. "Why didn't you say something?" "I didn't want to leave you in the lurch," she replied, unable to hide the trembling in her voice. "It's bad timing. There's so much at stake with the board, the rival threats, and everything else." For a moment she caught a flicker of genuine empathy in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared behind his composed exterior. "If you need to go, you should," he said. "But if you can manage a little longer until this investor meeting is done, let's just say we could really use you." The last phrase was uncharacteristically humble, hinting at trust and perhaps a glimmer of respect. She nodded, feeling the pull of conflicting loyalties in her gut. "I'll handle the investor demonstration," she said, Then, we'll see. They spent the next few hours working side by side in a glass-walled conference room, reviewing spreadsheets and refining the presentation slides. She guided him through each detail of how the analytics platform integrated with external databases. He asked pointed questions, occasionally pausing to jot down notes. Despite the tension, there was a certain synergy in their collaboration, an unspoken understanding that they both wanted to protect the company and its employees. Midway through, Celine dropped in with coffee and a gentle smile for Madeline. "Figured you two might need a caffeine boost," she said, setting down cups on the table. Madeline offered a grateful smile, and Blake nodded a quick thanks. He seemed less irritable than usual, focused instead on the importance of the upcoming meeting. Celine shot Madeline a meaningful glance as if to say, "I'm here for you." Madeline appreciated the unspoken support more than words could convey. By early afternoon, the investor arrived, a poised, sharp-eyed woman named Carmen Waller. She wore a crisp blazer and exuded an air of confidence that filled the boardroom. Several directors joined, looking tense and hopeful. Madeline launched into the technical demonstration, carefully explaining how data analytics could revolutionize supply chains, predict market shifts, and offer a real-time snapshot of consumer behavior. She spoke with clarity and passion, fueled by an inner resolve to prove she could handle this pivotal moment. Carmen asked a few tough questions, but Madeline answered each one with calm assurance. At one point, Blake stepped in to highlight the platform's potential impact on profit margins, his words complementing Madeline's technical detail. The synergy was noticeable. When Carmen finally leaned back in her seat, a faint smile curved her lips. "Well," she said, "this is certainly impressive. If you can deliver on even half of these promises, it would be a game changer." The board members exchanged guardedly optimistic glances. Blake looked at Madeline, and though he didn't smile, the slight relaxation in his posture told her he was pleased. The meeting concluded with a round of handshakes and polite goodbyes, Carmen stating she would review the materials once more but felt inclined to move forward. After she left, the board erupted in chatter. Several members patted Madeline on the back. A wave of pride and relief coursed through her. She had put aside her personal crisis for a moment to serve the team, and it paid off. Yet, as the excitement settled, the heaviness returned. Her father, the secret about her heritage, and the looming threat of a hostile corporate clash. It was like watching clouds roll in after a brief spell of sunshine. Later in the day, she found Blake in his office scanning through emails. "Looks like Carmen's set to finalize her commitment tomorrow," he said, eyeing the screen. "She wants a few clarifications on the rollout timeline, but I think we're good." Madeline exhaled, half smiling. "That's great." She hesitated, gathering her courage. "Listen, about my family emergency, I need to leave soon. As in, maybe as early as tomorrow night." Blake nodded, his expression unreadable. "Do what you have to do. You've done enough for today." Then, with a softer edge, he added, "Thank you." She felt the unexpected warmth of gratitude washing over her. "Right," she mumbled. "I'll wrap up any loose ends before I go." As she turned to leave, her phone vibrated inside her jacket pocket. She paused, checking the screen. It was a message from her father's lawyers, insisting she call back immediately. The knot in her stomach tightened. She backed away from Blake's desk, stepping outside to make the call in private. She found a quiet corner near a row of windows and dialed. The lawyer picked up on the first ring, his tone brisk. "Madeline, your father's condition is very serious. He needs you to sign certain documents or at least review them as soon as possible. I'm sending them to your email. This is time-sensitive." Her mind whirled. The corporate future, her father's health, the secrets she was juggling. Everything felt like it was closing in. She promised she'd check her email immediately and hung up. Her hands were trembling as she stared at the phone. Could she truly keep up this balancing act much longer? Despite her turmoil, She spent the remaining hours finishing tasks and coordinating handover notes, just in case she wouldn't be returning soon. By the time evening fell, she was drained. The office had mostly emptied, leaving only a few dedicated souls hunched over their desks. She tidied her workspace, trying to ignore the dull throb of a headache that had been building all day. Finally, she took a moment to open her inbox. Among the usual office memos and new project outlines, a flagged email from her father's legal team stared back at her. The subject line read, "Urgent, medical report and next steps." Her heart pounded. She clicked it open, scanning the attached medical document. Lines of text blurred for an instant. The words life-threatening and immediate intervention jumped out at her, sending a jolt of alarm through her system. She inhaled shakily, the world seeming to tilt. If her father's condition had deteriorated this far, she had virtually no time left to decide how, or if, she would fulfill his wishes. As she stood frozen, phone still in her hand, she realized there was no easy way out. Every path felt fraught with potential catastrophe. That evening, as she prepared to leave the office, she finally opened an email with a medical report. The father's condition has turned life-threatening. Madeline stands frozen, realizing she must make a critical choice very soon. Madeline paced the corridor outside Blake's office, her thoughts clashing like thunderclouds. Everything felt on the brink of collapsing. Her father's critical condition, the mounting suspicions from the board, and the guilt she carried for not revealing who she really was. She'd pushed off the decision to return home longer than she should have, hoping she could hold the threads of her life together a bit longer. But her phone kept buzzing with messages from her uncle, reminding her that her father needed her. And still, she hesitated, uncertain of the cost. She checked her watch, deciding she'd give Blake an update on the pilot program she'd landed. It would likely be her last major assignment before she ran out of time. The door to his office stood ajar, and inside she could see him hunched over a set of financial projections, face drawn in concentration. Her heart clenched. He'd been surprisingly understanding about her taking leave for a family emergency, but she hadn't told him the truth, that she was heir to the very corporation threatening his business, and that her father's failing health might force her into revealing that secret any day now. She raised her hand to knock, but a sudden wave of dizziness struck. The corridor spun, and she dropped her phone. She tried to steady herself against the wall, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Without warning, the ground seemed to pull her downward, and everything went black. When her eyes fluttered open, she was lying on a couch in a small break room, Celine kneeling beside her. The faint murmur of co-workers drifted in from the hallway. A glass of water hovered near her lips. "Madeline, hey," Celine said softly. "You fainted. Just take it easy." Blinking in confusion, Madeline sipped the water and forced herself to breathe. Across the room she spotted Blake, his face unreadable, arms folded. He looked more alarmed than angry, and relief touched his features when her gaze focused on him. "Do you feel any better?" he asked. She nodded weakly, though her heart was hammering. I'm all right. I don't know what happened." Celine exchanged a glance with Blake, then gently squeezed Madeline's hand. "We called an ambulance. You should get a proper checkup. Let them make sure it's nothing serious." Madeline wanted to protest, but another bout of nausea hit. Accepting the inevitability, she allowed them to guide her out of the building. Blake stayed close, quiet concern etched into his face. He insisted on riding along in the ambulance, his presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. She wondered if he feared she was a liability. Maybe he just wanted answers. Or maybe, beneath his tough exterior, he truly cared. At the hospital, she was wheeled into a curtained examination area. Doctors ran basic tests and asked routine questions. Celine had waited in the lobby while Blake paced in a narrow hallway, scanning messages on his phone but glancing frequently toward Madeline's curtained space. Eventually, one of the doctors emerged with a clipboard, beckoning Madeline to the side in private. She swallowed, bracing herself for bad news. perhaps stress or exhaustion from juggling too many secrets. But the doctor's expression wasn't grim. He spoke softly. "We confirmed why you fainted, Ms. Bennett. It appears you're pregnant, and by the blood work we have, it's twins." The words struck her like a thunderbolt. She stared, uncomprehending. "Twins?" she whispered, scarcely able to form the question. 100 emotions collided in her chest. Astonishment, excitement, fear, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She sank onto the edge of a chair, pressing trembling fingers to her lips. The doctor explained the next steps, emphasizing the importance of prenatal care, especially given her high-stress situation. She listened numbly, head spinning. How was she going to tell Blake? Should she tell him? Her father, her hidden heritage, and now this pregnancy. It felt like she was standing on the precipice of a massive revelation. When the doctor finished, she stepped back through the curtain. Blake was there, worry etched in his eyes. Celine hovered nearby but drifted away to give them space. He parted his lips to ask what was wrong, but she just shook her head, words tangling. Her voice came out in a near whisper. It's personal, but I'm all right." He exhaled, relief flickering. "If you're sure. The doctors wouldn't tell me anything since I'm not family." Madeline's heart twisted at the irony. He didn't know that, in a sense, he was already more than just her boss. She tried to steady her breathing. "I'll fill you in soon," she managed. "I need to process this." Back at her apartment later that evening, she sat on the couch, her mind still reeling. Pregnant with twins, Blake's twins. A million questions bombarded her. How would he react? Would he think she was trapping him somehow? She pictured him, proud and wary, reacting to the news with a blend of astonishment and suspicion. But she couldn't hide this forever. The truth had to come out. The next morning she walked into the office, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. She hadn't slept more than a couple hours, and now, standing near Blake's door again, she wondered if she had the courage to tell him right then and there. Her secret identity was one thing, an unborn set of twins was another. The latter might change everything, if he didn't shut her out first. She found him alone, reviewing documents at a glass table. He looked up, eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Not after you fainted yesterday. What if—" She took a slow breath. "I have something important to say. It can't wait." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to continue. "Blake, I'm pregnant. They're twins." He went still, color draining from his face. "What?" The word tore from his throat in disbelief. His gaze locked on her stomach, then flicked back to her face. After a beat, his expression hardened. "And you're telling me now? Are they—" Her jaw tightened. "Yes, they're yours. I wouldn't lie about that." He let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. "Madeline, this is huge. Why didn't you say something sooner?" She swallowed. "I only found out last night. I wasn't keeping it from you. And there's so much else going on. It's complicated." A war of emotions battled in his eyes. Shock, a flicker of concern, maybe even a hint of excitement, all overshadowed by guarded suspicion. "Are you in trouble? Do you need financial support? Is that what this is about?" Her cheeks burned, anger sparking. "No, it's not about money. I can support myself. I always have. I'm telling you because it's the truth, and you deserve to know." Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. He raked his hands through his hair again, face tight. "I don't know what to say." Silence stretched between them, thick and tense. Finally he spoke, voice softer. "I won't abandon you, or them, but I need time to process." She nodded, her heart pounding. "I know. I do too." The rest of the day slipped by in a haze. Blake spent long hours in closed-door meetings, occasionally sending uncertain glances her way. The few times their eyes met, she sensed a fragile connection that neither of them knew how to navigate. She turned her attention to finishing reports. mind whirling with possibilities. On one hand, she felt a strange surge of hope. Maybe this shared future could unite them. On the other, she dreaded the moment he discovered the entire truth of her background. By late afternoon, tension rippled through the corridors. Word spread of a second emergency board meeting. Directors hustled to hush rooms, jaws set in determination. Madeline suspected they were planning an immediate strike against the rival firm, and dread pooled in her stomach. If they approved a hostile takeover, it would pit her and Blake against her own father, just when she'd discovered she was carrying Blake's children. Reluctantly, she joined the meeting. Even the air in the boardroom felt charged with conflict. One director slammed a folder on the table, launching into a tirade about the rivals' weak points that could be exploited. Another countered with cautious optimism about continuing negotiations. Madeline stayed quiet, half listening, half lost in her own internal battle. Then Blake strode in, looking exhausted but determined. He cut through the noise with a single glare, demanding everyone's attention. As voices settled, he scanned the faces, his gaze lingering on Madeline. She gave him a faint nod of solidarity, though she felt her nerves fraying. Together, perhaps they could slow down this rush toward corporate war, but it might require her to share what she knew of her father's conditions. Could she risk that? The debate dragged on until dusk, and tension ran high. Madeline was about to excuse herself, feeling sudden nausea, when the meeting finally adjourned. People scattered, leaving her alone at the table, her head spinning from stress and fatigue. She made her way outside for a moment of fresh air, stepping off to the side of the building where the streetlights flickered. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down, expecting another cryptic message about her father's health, but the words on the screen made her breath hitch. Madeline's phone buzzes. Her father has made a public statement, naming her as the heiress of his corporation. She's left breathless, realizing the entire world, including Blake, will soon know her secret. Madeline stood rooted to the spot outside the office building, phone in hand, eyes fixed on the headline that spelled out her doom. Her father had publicly declared that she was the next heir of his corporation, and within minutes, the announcement had exploded across business news outlets and social media. Photographers and reporters were already clamoring online for a glimpse of this mysterious daughter, and now the entire world knew she was no mere junior employee. She could practically feel her cover story unraveling, and the realization nearly took her breath away. The chill night air wrapped around her as she scanned the details. The statement mentioned her father's poor health and implied her immediate involvement in the rival firm's leadership. She stifled a bitter laugh. He'd finally done it, forced her hand with a very public reveal. The question was, what would she do now? A flurry of questions rattled in her mind. Should she call him and beg him to retract his announcement? Impossible. The media were like sharks who smelled blood in the water. And what about Blake? How would he react to discovering that his suspicious junior employee was, in fact, the heiress of the corporation threatening his company's survival? Part of her suspected he'd already guessed some piece of the puzzle, but this would drop a bomb on whatever fragile trust remained between them. Heart-hammering, she forced her shaking legs to move. She slipped into the lobby, half expecting paparazzi to ambush her. But it was late, and no one else seemed to know she was there. She hurried past the empty reception desk to the elevator, swiped her ID, and jabbed the button to her floor. Doors sliding shut, she stared at her own reflection in the polished metal walls. Her face looked pale, eyes too wide, hair disheveled from the wind. It dawned on her how alone she felt. She had no plan for how to handle this, no script to recite to outraged shareholders or a furious Blake. The elevator dinged. She stepped out into a silent hallway. Most employees had gone home for the night, leaving only scattered lights illuminating the offices. A single lamp glowed in the distance, Blake's office. He was still here, likely checking stock updates or drafting an official response to her father's audacious reveal. She knew she should face him, but the idea filled her with dread. Before she could lose her nerve, she walked toward his office, each step echoing against the polished floor. Light spilled through the glass wall. Inside, Blake stood behind his desk, phone to his ear. She paused, watching him. His jaw was set, knuckles white around the phone. Whatever he was hearing had him tense. She hovered in the corridor until he noticed her. His gaze flicked over, and though he kept speaking quietly into the phone, she could feel the temperature drop. He finished the call with a curt tone, dropped the device on his desk, and waved her in. "Madeline," he began, voice clipped. "I just got off a call with a major shareholder. Care to guess the topic?" She swallowed the tremor in her throat. "The announcement." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "So it's true then. You're not just someone with a little insight. You're the heir, the one who's been threatening to swallow us whole." His eyes flashed with hurt and anger. "Were you sent here to spy, or did you do this on your own?" She shook her head, stepping closer. "I didn't plan for any of this. My father went public without asking me." "Convenient," he bit out. "You show up at my company under false pretenses, get close enough to become pregnant with my children." He stopped, as if the words themselves stung. Was this all a calculated move? Her cheeks flamed. "No," she said fiercely, struggling to steady her voice. "I never wanted to spy on you or sabotage this firm. I took the job because I needed to prove myself on my own terms. My father never trusted that I could do it. He cut her off with a raised hand. "So you hid your identity completely. Let me guess. You also never intended to tell me unless forced by circumstance. Because that's what this feels like. A forced confession." Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I tried," she whispered. "There were so many moments I wanted to come clean, especially when—" She hesitated, eyes flicking to her stomach. "When I realized we had a deeper connection, but every time I found the courage, something held me back." His stare was unrelenting. "And now everyone knows. You've humiliated me, yourself, and risked our entire operation. The board will see this as the worst kind of betrayal." She took a trembling step forward. "I'm sorry," she murmured, voice low. "I never wanted it to unfold like this." He shut his eyes for a moment, as though trying to calm the rage swirling inside him. "I can't think," he muttered. "I have to manage the fallout. The press will demand answers in the morning. The shareholders will want to know if we're compromised, and the board will likely call an emergency session by dawn." He opened his eyes and glared at her. "You should probably clear out your desk." The words stabbed at her. "So that's it? You're firing me? Firing you?" His laugh was cold. "You're not just an employee with a hidden agenda, you're the competition. Us." He gestured between them. "It was built on lies." For a moment, his voice shook with something like heartbreak. "If it were just me, I could handle it, but I have a company to protect." She pressed her lips together. "I understand." He turned away, resting both palms on the desk. "Figure out your next moves. Don't be here when the press comes knocking." His tone lowered. "And about the twins. We'll handle that later." She barely kept her tears in check as she backed away, out of his office. Every cell in her body wanted to fall apart, but the rawness of his anger and hurt forced her legs to move. She stumbled to the elevator, mind spinning. The father of her unborn children no longer trusted her and might never forgive her. Down on the ground floor, the chill night air hit her like a slap. She pressed her phone to her ear, ignoring the swarm of alerts and missed calls. Her uncle's voice answered after one ring, full of anxious worry. He'd seen the news, realized what her father had done. She gave him a shaky account of what had just happened, how Blake had reacted. Her uncle sighed heavily. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect your father to go public like that. He's desperate." She huddled against the side of the building, cloak of darkness shielding her tears from passers-by. "I can't see a way forward now," she admitted, voice trembling. "He's furious. My father's on his deathbed, and I've blown up everything I tried to keep together. Her uncle's tone softened. "You can't run from this forever, Madeline. If the news is out, you have to face it. But come home, at least for tonight. You shouldn't be alone." She murmured a faint agreement, then hung up. The city lights blurred through her tears. She knew the press would soon be lurking outside this very building, outside her apartment, maybe even her father's estate. Her heart squeezed at the thought of stepping back into that house as the newly revealed heiress, possibly pregnant with the CEO's children. For a fleeting moment, she considered fleeing entirely, somewhere far from the glare of cameras and condemnation in both corporations. But the very idea felt cowardly, especially with so many livelihoods on the line. How many employees were depending on a resolution between these two warring businesses? At last, she tore herself away from the building and hailed a ride. On the way to her place, she stared at the passing headlights, her mind running in circles. The father of her children had turned cold. Her father might not have long to live. The board, the media, every side demanded answers she didn't have. By the time she reached her apartment, her body shook from a mixture of exhaustion and dread. She moved numbly through the front door, flipping on the TV by reflex. An evening talk show was in full swing, the host dissecting the latest corporate scandal. Her name flashed on screen in bold letters, followed by speculation about the rumored pregnancy. She couldn't bear to watch. She lowered the volume but let the visuals drift on, focusing instead on the emptiness of her living room. Half of her wanted to pack a bag this very second, vanish before morning. Dragging herself to the bedroom, she reached for a suitcase on the top shelf. Her hands trembled as she unzipped it, images of her father's crestfallen face and Blake's fury swirling in her mind. Then, from the other room, the television volume jumped as a special report cut in. Curious, she edged back into the living area to see what was happening. Her eyes locked on the urgent news ticker at the bottom of the screen. Both her father's corporation and Blake's firm were suffering rapid stock declines amid the shock announcement. Experts warned of potential layoffs and mass panic unless decisive leadership intervened. The anchor stressed how the scandal might drive both businesses toward financial disaster. As she prepares to pack her belongings, Madeline sees a late-night news broadcast. Stock values for both firms are plummeting, threatening mass layoffs. She realizes running away might ruin countless livelihoods, and that she can't abandon her responsibilities. Madeline paced back and forth in her apartment, staring at the flickering images on the TV news bulletin. Headlines screamed about the plunging stock prices of both her father's corporation and Blake's firm, each side blaming the other for the crisis. The reporter's voice crackled with urgency, analyzing every moment of the corporate meltdown. She felt a horrible chill at the thought of all those employees, families, who might lose their jobs if the companies crumbled. Running away now would be the easy path, but it would also be the cowardly one. She turned off the TV with trembling fingers. Her father's plan to name her his heir had thrown both corporations into turmoil. Blake was furious with her, convinced she'd deceived him from the start. The board at his company felt betrayed, while her own father's board viewed her return as their saving grace. She stood at a crossroad, uncertain if either side would truly welcome her. Yet an unwavering sense of duty took root in her heart. She couldn't let the people who depended on these businesses be collateral damage. No matter how complicated her personal situation became, there had to be a way to bring calm to this storm. With a resolute inhale, she grabbed her phone and dialed her father's assistant, who answered in a hushed voice. "He's in bad shape," the assistant whispered. "But he insists on seeing you." The hospital staff allowed a meeting in his private room. Just him, you, and whoever else you want to bring. Madeline swallowed hard. Who else might that be? There was a beat of silence on the line. Then, the boards, executives, basically anyone critical to stabilizing the company. But your father only trusts you to arrange it. He wants to talk face to face despite his condition. Her chest tightened. "Set it up. I'll get as many key people as I can." She paused, exhaling shakily. Thank you." After hanging up, she stared at the phone in her hand. An urgent summit in her father's hospital room, bridging not only her family's company but potentially Blake's as well, if she could convince him to attend. Did she even have enough credibility left to pull that off? Her eyes shifted to the open suitcase on her bed, half-packed in preparation for a hurried flight from the media onslaught. Slowly, she walked over and zipped it shut, not to run away but to bring it along for a different purpose. The moment her father's assistant had confirmed the meeting, she'd known she would have to face everyone, her father's allies, her own critics, and Blake. She felt unsteady, but also oddly determined. This was her chance to prove she wasn't simply an imposter or a runaway heiress. She would fight to save both companies from total collapse if that was still possible. Before leaving, she texted Blake, "Emergency meeting at the hospital. My father insists. We need your voice there. Please come." She doubted he'd respond quickly. His anger was still fresh, but at the very least, she had to extend the invitation. An hour later, she stepped out of a hired car at the hospital's main entrance. Her father's assistant stood waiting near the sliding glass doors, looking haggard and tense. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed in the corridors, leading them to the private wing where her father rested. Two solemn-faced security guards stood by the door, letting her and the assistant pass into a surprisingly large room cleared of most medical equipment except for the bed and a few monitors. They'd turned it into a makeshift conference space. The sight of it turned her stomach. It felt wrong to conduct business in a place meant for healing. Yet time was running out, and her father was too frail to travel. Her father lay propped on pillows, an oxygen tube under his nose. His skin looked ashen, and his eyes flicked tiredly toward her. But there was no mistaking the glint of determination that kept him going. He managed a weak nod. "Madeline." She swallowed. "Dad." He coughed, clearing his throat. "Have you reached out to them? To Blake's people?" She opened her mouth, unsure how to answer, when the door opened again. Her uncle stepped in first, face etched with concern. Behind him, a slow trickle of executives and board members from her father's firm filed in. They looked wary, clutching laptops and manila folders. Their eyes slid over Madeline as though reevaluating her, some with open skepticism, others with hope. And then another figure appeared in the doorway. Blake. He paused, scanning the room, his face as cold and unreadable as stone. For a moment, he and Madeline locked eyes. She could practically feel the tension pouring off him, fueled by his sense of betrayal. Yet here he was, stepping into the lion's den, risking his own pride and comfort in an enemy stronghold. She fought the urge to thank him for coming. A subdued hush fell as everyone arranged themselves around the bed. Some people stood near the walls while others found chairs. Her father lifted a trembling hand, urging them to gather closer. Madeline stepped to the side, her father's assistant adjusting the oxygen tube. The older man inhaled, voice barely above a wheeze. "I won't waste time on pleasantries. We're all here because this crisis could sink both companies, and I'm not leaving this world until we have a plan to save them." The tension in the room crackled. One of her father's board members cleared his throat. "Sir, we have a buyer interested in acquiring controlling shares." "No!" her father rasped, cutting him off. "No buyout. We want a partnership, a real alliance. That's where my daughter comes in." Madeline's cheeks warmed under the heavy stares. She remembered the pitch she'd tried to make within Blake's company, urging them to consider collaboration instead of a hostile takeover. Now that her father had publicly named her the heir, the pieces were all in disarray. She glanced at Blake, hoping to catch some hint of support, but his face remained unmoving. Her father gestured to the battered folders and documents around him. "I've got preliminary sketches here for how we could merge efforts. Technology, distribution, marketing. It's all laid out, but it requires both sides to sign on." An executive from Blake's team stepped forward. He cast a nervous glance at Blake, then addressed her father. "Pardon me, sir, but your company's position has always been combative. Why should we trust you now?" Blake stiffened but didn't interject, seemingly curious how Madeline or her father would respond. Her father's lips thinned. "Because my health is failing and I want to see a stable future. Because of that," he nodded at Madeline, "and because, quite simply, if we destroy each other, we all lose." The executive looked uncertain. Madeline decided it was time to speak. She cleared her throat. "We can't undo the past. My father's illness, the public scandal, my hidden identity. It's all out in the open now. But the truth is, I came to Blake's firm initially to prove my value without relying on the family name. I never intended for this chaos to explode." She scanned the faces, feeling exposed. "However, I've seen firsthand the talent and drive in both companies. I know we could do something extraordinary if we worked together." A murmur spread. Some looked skeptical, but others seemed intrigued by her conviction. Her father nodded slowly, clearly struggling just to maintain consciousness, but resolved to keep going. Blake finally spoke, his tone cool. "Your words sound promising, Madeline, but trust has been shattered. Why should we believe this isn't another move to take advantage of us?" She inhaled. This was the question she'd dreaded. "Because I have just as much to lose," she said softly, thinking of the twins growing inside her. "I'm not here to ambush anyone. If we don't act soon, both companies could fall to ruin. Our employees will suffer, and so will the market." A brief silence enveloped the room. Her father's weak voice then cut through the hush. "Madeline, show them the plan. Go on." Hesitating, she glanced at Blake, then stepped closer to the bedside where charts were laid out. She began explaining the proposed merger strategy, a balanced approach that wouldn't require one side to devour the other, but rather pool resources to become a unified force against external competitors. She pointed out how combining R&D with distribution could slash costs, how partnering on technology could open global markets. A few of the rival executives exchanged guarded nods. The argument made sense on paper, at least. As she spoke, she felt the intensity of Blake's gaze. His eyes remained hard, but he was listening. She could sense his analytical mind evaluating the plan, scanning for flaws, opportunities, and whether it was all too good to be true. Eventually, he cleared his throat, addressing the room. "It's compelling," he admitted, "but we need transparency. Every figure, every contract, every hidden liability." His gaze swung back to Madeline. "No more secrets." She met his stare, nodding. "Agreed." Her father's breathing grew labored, the monitors beeping softly. His assistant signaled for him to rest, but he waved them off, gritting out the final words. "Do it. Make this alliance happen. Secure the future, for everyone." Then his body sagged back against the pillows. Medical staff hurried in, checking his vitals. The room grew tense, everyone uncertain whether to leave or wait. Blake lingered, arms folded, watching the doctor's careful ministrations. Madeline's uncle gently guided her father's hand, whispering something reassuring. Minutes passed in hushed worry, but her father's vitals stabilized, and a nurse suggested that he rest. The assistant ushered the executives out, ensuring they had the key documents in tow. Madeline caught quiet words from some of them. "This might work. We'll review it in detail. Should we trust them?" The mixture of doubt and cautious optimism was palpable. The hospital room cleared until only Madeline, Blake, her uncle, and her father, now sleeping, remained. The uncle spoke softly. "Madeline, they need leadership. Both sides. And your father can't do it alone. Find a way to build unity." She nodded, pressing her lips together. "I will." Blake's expression had softened only slightly. He glanced down at her father, then at her. "If we're going to do this, I need to know we're on the same page," he said, voice low. "I can't afford another surprise." She held his gaze, heart pounding. "There won't be any more surprises from me." He studied her for a moment that felt like hours, then gave a short nod. "All right," he said. "I'll look at the plan in depth. We'll see if this is really feasible. For now, I need to manage my board's reaction." Madeline stepped aside as he moved toward the door. Despite the heavy tension lingering between them, something like renewed hope flickered in her chest. Perhaps they could salvage not only the companies, but also the fragile connection between them. As Blake reached the door, he looked back at her. His words were quiet but carried surprising weight. "If we do this, we do it together. Don't make me regret trusting you." Her heart clenched, and she nodded, unable to speak. He gave her one last measured glance, then slipped out of the room. The monitors beeped steadily, and her father breathed in shallow sleep. She felt both gratitude and terror swirling inside her. Tomorrow's negotiations would be brutal, with no guarantee of success. But for the first time in days, she saw a path forward, albeit a perilous one. Blake leaves the hospital room, pausing to look back at Madeline. His parting words are quiet, but intense. "If we do this, we do it together. Don't make me regret trusting you." Her heart pounds with renewed optimism and fear for what tomorrow's final negotiation will bring. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of the conference room, revealing tired yet determined faces. Madeline stood with Blake at the head of a long table, their shoulders nearly touching. Despite the tensions and betrayals that led them here, they now presented a united front. Fresh documents lay in neat stacks, detailing a plan to merge two once-rival corporations into a single, formidable alliance. Board members and investors from both companies filled the room. Some looked skeptical, others looked hopeful. Madeline exchanged a quick glance with Blake, recalling the sleepless night they had spent reviewing every section of the agreement. They had combed through finances, inventory, and human resources data to ensure a stable merger. The success of this plan could mean saving jobs and averting disaster, if everyone agreed to put aside old grudges. She inhaled, stepping forward. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice steady but laced with urgency. "As you know, my father's health is precarious, and the recent revelations have shaken investor confidence. Both of our corporations face significant risk if we don't act decisively. We're here to offer a solution." The room fell silent. Blake cleared his throat. "This merger would combine our technologies, patents, and distribution networks," he explained. "We'd also unify management structures. Instead of each firm duplicating overhead and fighting for market share, we'd align resources and enter new markets together." Eyes darted between them. A tall board member from Blake's side crossed his arms. "And who gets control? Because from where I'm standing, each side has reason to want the lion's share of power." Madeline lifted a folder of neatly labeled pages. "We propose an equitable governance structure, a shared executive committee and rotating leadership for certain divisions. It's designed to foster collaboration, not a hostile takeover." A low murmur swept the gathering. Her father's general counsel, the man who had guided her father's affairs for decades, rose from his chair. "And who ensures no one side oversteps?" Blake cast a brief, assessing glance at Madeline. They'd already anticipated this question. He spoke calmly. "A joint oversight board will be formed, made up of members from both existing boards, plus an independent advisory panel. It's not perfect, but it's the best way to prevent abuse." Silence reigned for a moment. Then, one by one, board members voiced their concerns. They questioned finances, worried about brand identity, and balked at the risk of co-managing projects with former rivals. Madeline listened intently, addressing each issue in turn. Her months working alongside Blake's team gave her a unique perspective on how best to mesh the two operations. Despite residual wariness, she sensed a slow shift in the room. Some heads began to nod. The possibility of success glimmered. Still, tension simmered beneath the surface. A few executives exchanged suspicious looks, uncertain whether old feuds could be buried. At last, A senior official from her father's firm, an aging gentleman with kind eyes, cleared his throat. "Young lady," he said gently, "I've watched you grow up, from a distance at least. It's unusual, to say the least, that you worked covertly for the competition. But if this plan is genuine, it might be our only salvation." Madeline dipped her head. "Thank you. I understand the doubts. I truly never intended to deceive anyone. It was a misstep that got out of control. Now, all I want is to help secure a future where both sides benefit." Her words hung in the air. She could feel Blake standing close, radiating a calm she hadn't felt from him in days. At last, the gathered group made their way to a formal vote. Pens scratched across paper as the last holdouts considered their decisions. Then, with a sense of finality, the votes were handed in, tallied quickly by two nervous assistants. The result? A majority in favor of the merger. Relief swept over Madeline so strongly that she felt momentarily lightheaded. Blake offered a curt nod, the corners of his mouth lifting in a barely there smile. Their eyes met. In that moment, everything else seemed to fade. The rumors, the betrayal, even the corporate drama. They'd come together to save something larger than themselves. The sense of accomplishment vibrated through the room like a chord struck on a grand piano. A sudden shuffle at the door grabbed their attention. A security guard stepped in, guiding an older, suited man with a furtive expression. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Madeline recognized him as a high-level executive from Blake's company, the same one who had championed extreme measures against her father's firm. He looked cornered, wild-eyed. One of Blake's directors rose, pointing an accusing finger. "That's him, the one who's been spreading false rumors and trying to sabotage negotiations from within." The man's face twisted. "I did it for the good of the company," he spat defensively. "I believed merging would weaken our identity, so I leaked false data to stoke fear and push for a hostile takeover." Blake's jaw tightened, anger rippling under the surface. "You nearly destroyed us both," he said quietly, voice deadly calm. "Effective immediately. You're dismissed. Our legal team will handle the rest." Security led the disgraced executive away. Though the revelation was unsettling, Madeline felt a surge of vindication. The hidden saboteur had been unmasked, clearing the path for genuine collaboration. Now, the new alliance between the two corporations could proceed without shadowy interference. News spread rapidly. Media outlets picked up the surprising twist, the heiress and the once rival CEO joining forces, rooting out corruption from within. Within days, stock prices steadied, employees breathed easier, and the public marveled at the shocking yet hopeful turnaround. But while the corporate world celebrated a reprieve, Madeline and Blake also turned their attention to a more personal matter. Time passed swiftly. Her father's health stabilized enough for him to oversee a portion of the transitional process, though he insisted on stepping back to let his daughter and Blake take the lead. And as each hurdle was overcome, Madeline and Blake found themselves gravitating closer. Late nights working on contracts turned into soft confessions, apologies, and quiet moments acknowledging the life blossoming beneath her heart. Eventually, the day arrived that many of the two companies' employees never could have imagined. A wedding invitation landed in their inboxes. Although it seemed sudden to outsiders, anyone who had watched the ebb and flow of Madeline and Blake's relationship recognized an inevitability. The invitation read simply, "Join us in celebrating the union of two hearts and two legacies." A sunlit garden belonging to a historic estate was chosen for the ceremony. Rows of white chairs lined an aisle adorned with wildflowers. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender, mingling with soft music from a string quartet. Celine, teary-eyed with happiness, helped Madeline adjust her gown, smoothing out the delicate lace sleeves. The dress was elegant yet understated, draping loosely around her gently rounded belly. Madeline's heart thundered with a blend of nerves and excitement. She reached the altar where Blake waited in a tailored suit, his expression brimming with emotion. Her father, in a wheelchair at the front row, managed a weary but proud smile as Madeline approached. When the officiant began the ceremony, she risked a glance at the guests, familiar faces from both corporations, once locked in suspicion, now sitting side by side, quietly sharing in the celebration. The exchange of vows was personal and raw. Blake promised to protect not only her, but the life they were building together. Madeline pledged honesty and trust, vowing to stand at his side whether facing boardroom showdowns or family upheavals. Soft tears glistened in the corners of her eyes as she spoke, remembering the precarious steps that had led them here. When they were pronounced husband and wife, applause and cheers erupted, echoing across the flower-dappled lawn. Doves fluttered from a small cage, rising into the bright sky as a symbol of new beginnings. Madeline felt the warmth of Blake's hand slip around her waist. Surrounded by people from both families, corporate and personal, they ventured into a large white tent for a joyful reception. Laughter mingled with the clink of glasses as old grudges dissolved in the face of a blossoming future. Later, amidst the swirl of music and conversation, Madeline and Blake snuck off to a quiet terrace. The sun hung low, bathing the horizon in gold and pink. He pulled her close, free hand resting on her belly, where their twin children made their presence known with a gentle flutter. "I never imagined we'd come to this," he said softly. "So many secrets and betrayals, and yet we found each other, and we found a way to unite our worlds." She reached up, fingers brushing his cheek. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she murmured, eyes shining, "for believing I wasn't just the heiress who walked into your life with trouble in tow." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "You taught me that sometimes the biggest threats hold the greatest gifts." Music drifted from inside the tent, guests calling for the bride and groom to return for a final toast. Blake led her back in. The crowd parted, turning to watch as the two took center stage one last time. Her father, though frail, lifted his glass in approval. Celine and her uncle exchanged broad smiles from a nearby table. The sense of unity was profound, a far cry from the suspicion and rancor that had reigned just weeks before. The joy in the tent felt almost electric. As the last dance concluded, Madeline and Blake found themselves surrounded by applause and well wishes. She rested her head on his shoulder, heart swelling with gratitude for a second chance at building a better world, both for themselves and everyone who relied on the newly merged corporation. In that glowing moment, she felt the twins kick, their own tiny celebration. Blake chuckled, placing his hand over hers. He leaned in, voice tender, breath warm against her ear. In the final moment, just as they seal their vows, Madeline feels the twins kick, and Blake whispers, "These little ones will know how two worlds became one." The sense of hope and harmony leaves everyone ready for the next chapter of their lives. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.